Look, 40,000 people died on the roads last year. I can knock that number down to 0 right now. It's easy. Drop the speed limit to 5 miles an hour. Everybody wears a helmet. Wrap yourself in bubble pack and no more left turns. And let's make the cars out of rubber too, right? 40,000 lives saved like that. If that were your real goal, why don't you do that? Safety's important. Everybody knows that, who's ever worked around machines like this or has just tried to get through life. Safety matters a great deal. But on dirty jobs, we always look for the unintended consequence of a thing. And we always try to look at bromides and platitudes and cookie cutter advice with some suspicion, because the unintended consequences of following pat advice can be very steep, especially in the vocational arts. And so what happens when you tell somebody safety is first? What happens when you tell a worker that the most important thing in the world is their safety? Well, that's a well-intended thing to say, but if you say it often enough, then you run the risk, in my opinion, of creating an air of complacency that ultimately puts people in harm's way. What happened to us on Dirty Jobs was really simple. For the first 2 years of that show, we went to the most hazardous places in the country. A crew of greenhorns who went out into the world to try and give our viewers an honest look at what work looked like. Now, we were frightened because by and large, we were in places that could rip you into very small pieces with all kinds of machinery that was truly hazardous, right? So we were very, very mindful of our surroundings, and we sat through all of the safety protocols and all of the safety meetings like this, right? Like we paid attention because we had a lot of skin in the game. So for the first 2 years of Dirty Jobs, whether it was on a crab boat or whether it was on top of a windmill or at the bottom of a coal mine, nobody got hurt, not once, because we were very, very focused on the work. We were very much of a safety first mindset. Season 3, everything fell to pieces. I broke 2 fingers, a toe, cracked a rib, and fused my eyebrows off. My cameraman, same thing. Everybody on the show got hurt. Thankfully, no one catastrophically. But there were lots of stitches, sprains, breaks, contusions, and concussions. What happened? What I think happened was after sitting through maybe 60 mandatory briefings, all of the safety first banners, all the nomenclature, all the orthodoxy, we stopped paying attention. It started sounding, you remember the teacher and the Charlie Brown things?
Wah, wah, wah.
Mrs. Othmar. That's what all the safety professionals started to sound like. We just simply stopped focusing on lockout, tagout procedures. We went through the confined space training, but we didn't really pay attention. Safety first became a thing that ultimately created in us an impression that somebody cared more about our well-being than we did. And that impression was the beginning of the end for our health and well-being. So I started saying safety third to my crew members simply to break through the noise and remind them that in the end, real safety, which is safety always, is a combination of personal responsibility and focus. And the unintended consequence of letting somebody know that you care more about their well-being than they do, that, in my view, leads to all sorts of trouble.
You're sitting in a, as it were, you coined the phrase, a cathedral to work. There's 7 million jobs waiting to be filled by people that could run a drill press, run a lathe, deal with these kind of things. And somehow work got redefined in a unique way. So take me to your counselor's office in the 70s.
Mr. Dunbar.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because you were a potential victim of an attempt to change work.
A well-intended attempt. You know, I don't want to shake my finger at anybody, but in the mid-late 70s, we decided as a culture that more people needed to get an advanced degree. And we were probably right? We needed more people to enthusiastically pursue a university education. But in order to convince people that their best chance of success was a four-year degree, we began promoting four-year degrees at the expense of all the other forms of education. And so we do this in so many different ways. But for me, I remember Mr. Dunbar calling me down to his office, 1979, and he wanted to talk about my future. It's time to talk about your future, Mike. And I'd done okay on some college entrance exams, and he looked at my scores and said, your future is University of Maryland, University of Pennsylvania, maybe James Madison. And I couldn't afford any of those schools. And more to the point, Matt, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so a liberal arts degree was expensive. It would have required me to go into debt, borrow money. That wouldn't have played well in my home. And so my strategy was to go to a two-year school, take all the different kinds of courses I could find, and see if something sparked, And at $26 a credit, I could afford to be wrong at that point. So I told this to my guidance counselor, and he said, that's all beneath your potential. And then he pointed to a poster behind his head on the wall. And his question was, which one of these guys do you want to be? And on the poster were two men. One, a young graduate from a college, dressed in a cap and gown, holding his diploma. Sun rising before him, awash in optimism. And next to him was a skilled worker in a dirty environment, looking down at the ground, holding a wrench, looking very much like he had just won some vocational consolation prize, right? And the caption said, work smart, not hard. And so, as near as I can figure it, the war against traditional work began around the same time the push for a very specific kind of education embarked. And so while we started telling a whole generation that the best path for the most people was a four-year degree, we also started telling them that if you don't go in that direction, you're going to wind up like the guy in the photo, looking dirty and miserable and doomed. Around the same time, we took shop class out of high school. When we did that, we removed all vestige of what an entire chunk of our workforce actually looks like. Wood shop, metal shop, auto shop, all this stuff, right? It doesn't matter if you're ultimately into it or not. When you're 15 or 16 years old, there's nothing more persuasive to discourage you from thinking about something than removing all proof of its existence. And that's what we did. We took shop class out of high school. We started telling an entire generation that if it wasn't a four-year degree, you were doomed. Flash forward to today, $1.6 trillion in outstanding student loans, 7.5 million jobs that don't require a four-year degree, but require training and skill. The skills gap and the cost of college are not problems, they're symptoms. They're symptoms of a larger disconnect with work. And to the extent that I'm able, with dirty jobs and somebody's got to do it, and my foundation, we simply try to show the country examples of people who have bridged that disconnect by learning a skill that's in demand, by figuring out how to operate that thing, or whatever it is, and by not making skilled training the enemy.
We're making this up as we go, but that poster got my attention. You've, through your foundation, you've made these posters up, and if there's a telephone number on the screen, call it. If it's an email address, email us. And we want to get you one of these things. And
Matt, let me explain the before and after, just
okay.
so people are clear. I didn't really tell you this, but the urge in me to lean across my guidance counselor's desk and slap Mr. Dunbar upside the head was very nearly overwhelming. Because the guy in the photo who looked like, the sad case, he looked like my grandfather. a man who could build a house without a blueprint. The whole depiction of him was wrong.
Yeah.
Right? And so for that reason, I didn't really want to slap the guy, but I did want to cross out the word not and replace it with the word and. Work smart and hard. There was a time in our country where that was the mandate. That was the conventional wisdom. But somehow along the line, we got clever and we got cute and we started saying, wait a minute, if you work smart enough, then you won't need to work hard, right? And that is also part of the reason why it just became so fashionable to wage a war on work. It goes to the difference between being efficient and being effective. Both are good things, right? But if you take efficiency to its logical conclusion, well, you have a robot.
A robot doing it, yeah.
And if you take effectiveness to its logical conclusion, then you have a very competent human. Huxley said, the greatest threat to freedom is total anarchy. But the second greatest threat is total efficiency.
My goodness.
So, Dirty Jobs was a rumination on work. My foundation came out of that show, and today we're still ruminating on it. And we're still trying to challenge the prevailing definition of a good job.
I sometimes get frustrated sitting with you. And
take a number.
Yeah. And because I have never really been able to get a look down the rabbit hole deep enough. Every time I think you've gone deep in something that you really care about, you go to a whole new level. I've never been able to tap the well of who you are. This stuff is really meaningful to you.
I'm like a Russian nesting egg.
Yeah.
You think you got the egg.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's another egg in there. Yeah. No, look, it's I look at it, it's all things are micro macro to me, right? I'm micro. So on an individual basis, I do my best to make sense of the challenges that I'm presented with. But on a macro level, and we've talked about this before, work is one of those things that ought to be one of the great uniters in our country right now. And once upon a time it was. Nobody in this country would dare logically make a case against the benefits of hard work. We wouldn't do it because we all knew that part of the path to prosperity involved hard work. Today, there is an affirmative push to challenge anyone who says, wait a second, maybe the problem is you're not working hard enough. If you say that, that's heresy. It's not just a polite debate. You're really not allowed to say that. We have this thing in our foundation called the Sweat Pledge. Everybody has to sign it. It's 12 simple points that are really a statement of belief. And many people will find a point or two on there that they don't agree with. And parents especially will really take offense. So why should my son sign this thing that says just because I'm in compliance doesn't mean I'm out of danger? Because ultimately my safety is my responsibility. They don't want their kids signing that because they've bought into this idea that their health and well-being isn't up to them. It's up to their employer. It's up to whoever owns the building. You've got axes and hatchets and knives lying around here. I see a thing. It looks like you throw hatchets into wood, all right? Now, is that a safety first thing to do?
No.
So life is risk, and risk ought to be mitigated. It ought to be managed. Nobody wants to take needless risks. But if we think we can make life better by eliminating risk entirely, then we've lost something that goes right to the guts of humanity.